This is a small art haul I recently got. I specifically purchased Manganese Blue Hue and Lunar Black by Daniel Smith so that I could mix a lot of different colors. I had to compromise and purchase Daniel Smith despite their bad ethics lately. Though I will never buy Primatech, I will buy specific colors from them for that purpose. I also got Mono Zero refills and 2 new Stabilo All pencils. I researched how to mix Lunar Blue so I don't have to purchase that as a separate tube. In order to refill my Mono Zero, I have to hold down the end and push the new eraser in. It's very relieving to have a refill because I'd completely run out. First, I'm going to test these Stabilo All pencils. The brown and red pencils are able to write on many surfaces and are water soluble. I'm using water off screen and this paintbrush to show their solubility. I'm testing these out in order to think about how I can use them in future artworks. I've been extremely happy with the Stabilo All black pencil and fairly happy with the white. The white is still very useful for drawing on dark paper including black, although it dissolves more and isn't as opaque as I was hoping. The black, however, is extremely dark and rich. I'm very happy with the red and brown. The brown is a little more mild, so I need to keep that in mind, and the red is a little more bold, but not as bold as it possibly could be. It's something I have to think about and figure out how to use in mixed media artwork going forward. Now is the exciting time I've been waiting for. I'm going to mix my version of Lunar Blue, an imitation of Daniel Smith's Lunar Blue, which you can get from them as a tube. However, as I'm trying to reduce costs because I can't afford it, and also because I'm trying not to purchase too much Daniel Smith due to their ethics being pretty terrible in the Primatech situation and untrustworthiness in general, I decided that I need to mix my own. I reduced it to the minimum number of tubes I can purchase, but I had to purchase Lunar Black as it was the best option for a Mars Black pigment that I could purchase where I live, and I needed Manganese Blue Hue specifically because they have a kind of fluorescent pigment in there that allows it to imitate manganese blue and create different mixes. As it's an important mixing color, I decided, despite the controversy, to invest in both these colors, Lunar Black and Manganese Blue Hue. In order to mix Lunar Blue, I simply need to mix these two colors together. Well, it's not that simple. According to my research, I need to add a little bit of phthalo blue green shade in the mix for better separation and vibrancy. After mixing it up, I tested it. I found the initial mix I did and the guess based on my research to be quite perfect in my opinion, so I went with that. Once this runs out, I'm going to have to try to mix it again and hope I get close to the mix I like. I'm going to mix not too much so that if I make a mistake, I can adjust it by adding a different color. Now I'm filling in different swatch cards so that I have different reference points for these colors. I'm making sure that I use part of it at more full strength and part of it watered down to show the mass tone and also show a little bit more of what it looks like when it's watered down. Keep in mind that paint does look different and react differently on different papers. This requires a lot more testing and learning and memorization. Time to mix a special color that I've been planning since I decided to purchase Lunar Black. Event Horizon, I call it. It's meant to be a gouache watercolor, and it's meant to be very matte black, but slightly granulating when it waters out, as well as be slightly more bluish than a Lunar Black on its own. I actually achieved this effect perfectly. My guess was correct. I invested a little bit in mixing this color so that I can use it going forward. Event Horizon is going to be a very fun, extremely dark black I'll be able to use in artwork. I don't end up using my Event Horizon mix for the later dragon painting in this video because I found it to be a little too dark. So instead, I went with the Lunar Black directly for that painting, but I have been using Event Horizon in other works since then and intend on mixing it in the future. Mixing Shadow Rose and Shadow Magenta based on various brands and available colors I don't wish to invest in separately. I did many tests by trying out Lunar Black with many different pinks and magenta tones. Of the two that I preferred the ones that I used in this video. For my version of Shadow Magenta, it's Lunar Black and Quinacridone Magenta, and my version of the separating and granulating Shadow Pink is Lunar Black with Quinacridone Coral. These are all Daniel Smith paints, And once again, despite the controversy, their paints are really high quality, so I do understand if people buy them. I do recommend you buy colors that are better for mixing and mix your own alternate versions so that you're not spending as much money in the first place, but also not supporting them too much given their morals on the Primatech scandal. After filling out the swatch cards, I take out a nice sheet of my 100% cotton, 90-pound mixed media Strathmore paper. Now, this painting starts by me having to sketch out a dragon. I actually didn't do any thumbnails, preparation, or research for this painting. It was a completely inspired sudden decision. I think the final dragon is nice, but it's a little too generic. So I think next time I do something like this, I'll probably do more research and gather more reference and maybe spend a little more time and effort on it. At the same time, sometimes a more basic, generic dragon like this is actually very pleasant, especially considering I was focusing more on using my new color mixes and doing a nice, spacey nebula background. I decided to include the entire pencil sketch stage. I was careful to try not to over-erase on this paper. That might have caused some of the troubles with the fuzziness that come up later, but I think it's more an issue with the paper itself or the fact that I might have used the back side of the page, as you'll see. But I can't be certain. I work on it in stages, erasing out corrections and focusing on trying to get the basic idea without needing to erase too much, as I was trying not to damage the paper. But at the same time, I erased as needed. I darkened certain areas and kept the entire thing more on the clear side, without extra sketchy lines if they were unnecessary. I thought about the three-dimensional space and realistic anatomy of this creature. I've spent many years studying and designing dragons, as well as studying, designing, and drawing realistic mythical creatures and real animals, both living and extinct. I used all that knowledge, even though I didn't prepare any additional research or planning for this painting. I had planned for years, in a sense, because of all my research and practice. For the first layer of watercolor, I'm using mostly the Shadow Rose mix, more watered down. I used a large natural-haired brush, which was more soft and able to do large areas. I didn't want this to be very dark or too pale, so I used the brush as well to blend certain edges out. Even with this initial wash layer, I made sure some areas were darker than other areas, and I intentionally made certain areas extremely watered down, such as the horns, teeth, and claws. I tried to get a certain amount of the color tone in that I really wanted. A little bit of shadow magenta in as well with the Shadow Rose, and I tried to get things in a soft, wet on wet, blurry technique to get things to have a nice initial layer. Between layers of this painting, I had to leave and do separate videos in order to let it dry. I could have also used a hairdryer to speed up drying, but I decided to actually just let it naturally air dry between layers for this process. I was using the moisture on the edge of the brush also to blur out the edges. Sometimes you need to try different things on different paper and combine mixed media. Here I'm using that lunar blue mix I made earlier to add in more details and layers. I wanted the dragon to have a sort of luminescent, multi-hued tone that kind of looked like it glows through all the scales in the body, and to have different tones in it that make you think about sort of space and nebulas in general. But in general, I made the dragon more on the light side because I intended on putting more of a dark, vibrant space background behind it, which is what I do. I'm watering down lunar black directly to make a gray tone that I'm using for a lot of the shadows here. By using a lot of the same colors, everything has more of a color harmony, because the colors used are the colors that are used to mix the different colors involved, if that makes sense. It's called using mother colors, or related color techniques. I make sure to think about the anatomy and the lighting. The lighting is not a particularly realistic lighting in this case, and I also make some corrections by scrubbing on the paper. I need to be careful not to scrub too much to cause pilling. I'm making slight corrections and deciding exactly what I'm going to do as I go along. Sometimes you take pauses and breaks to think about what you're doing before you do it. After allowing it to thoroughly dry, I now use more of a wet brush to wet the entire background in, so I can try to work the space and nebula into a more wet on wet technique, so the paint will flow into each other and get very soft edges. I work the whole paper thoroughly wet and try to place the colors down fairly quickly before it becomes too dry. The limited palette I use for this space are the colors I selected that I felt would work best for this piece. My Shadow Rose mix, my Shadow Magenta mix, my Lunar Blue mix, Lunar Black, Manganese Blue hue, and my Cobalt Teal Blue. I had recently found out that Cobalt Teal Blue had an interesting effect by pushing other colors away and being sort of aggressive, so you can actually use it on top in wet and wet techniques for things like nebulas in space. One of the reasons why I did this painting was to test out these colors to create this space background, to test out the granulation of Lunar Black, and to test out this Cobalt Teal Blue technique that I'd seen showcased before. I also wanted to try out my color mixes. A lot of the motivation of this painting was to try these colors specifically, which is why, even though the dragon is the focus, the real focus is to try out the colors and paints, the behavior of the pigments, and the way it looks when dry. I was also doing additional tests on this paper to see if I actually really like it or not, and what I think it's most suitable for. I'm intentionally working in things to increase the contrast. I place Lunar Black in darker mass tone around some of the edges of the body. This is intentional, done to outline the dragon and make it stand out more. I intentionally made sure the dragon itself stood out more by designing the space behind it to have the highest contrast while still blending it out and trying to make it look like the space could have this color and look naturally. Here I get to try out the Cobalt Teal Blue technique. I'd pre-primed the Cobalt Teal Blue with a bit of water, and I used a more stiff makeup brush to tap in a couple smaller Cobalt Teal Blue spots. I blend out the edges, and I continue working with the Lunar Black as I go forward. I'm switching between colors. I'm focusing on getting the black, sort of quasi outlines around certain areas to draw focus and contrast. The face, around the wing, the lower body, and the rear leg. I add in more along the top here so that the contrast is a bit higher between the dragon and the background. I'm really focusing on making that background vibrant and pop so that the lighter colored dragon also contrasts very highly with the darker background. The dragon is a bit more pastel compared to the more vibrant background, which is another point of contrast. It's not always just light and dark that creates contrast. Here I'm finishing off the painting a bit more. I decided that at this point the contrast is too heavy between the background and the dragon, and now that I've seen the background in and dry, there needs to be more shadows, shading, and vibrancy in the dragon itself. Primarily using the Shadow Magenta, but also a different color mix, a violet-gray Shadow Whisper that I had mixed previously to creating this video, a tiny bit of that Shadow Violet mixed in with the Shadow Magenta made an even darker tone. You can see me swatch a couple tests there on the bottom, which was to check what the colors actually looked like. Also, you can use scrap pieces of paper. Remember that colors can even look a different tone and work a different way on different papers, so if you're using scrap papers and tests, I advise you use the same type of paper. I didn't like the fuzzy look of things, so I taped everything down. Carefully going in with 3 different selected Fineliners, I go in and create outlines. You can rescue a piece that looks too fuzzy or indistinct a few different ways. One way is by using Fineliners and making it in a more graphic style. I feel like this vastly improved this painting and made it from something I didn't really enjoy to something I enjoy quite a lot. I went with a very thin wine-colored Copic fineliner, a very thin sepia fineliner, and a thicker brown fineliner, which is a waterproof India ink fineliner. These are all waterproof when dry, which is important if you're going to layer over them. I advise you wait for fineliners to dry 8 hours, at least overnight, to set fully into the page if you're going over them with any water. This was actually more of a top layer, so I didn't actually need to wait. In this case, I wasn't going to go over the top of this really with any watercolors, but if I decided I needed to, I used waterproof fineliners so that I could choose to continue layering if I wanted. Test your different art media and take notes. Make sure you're not accidentally using something that'll cause trouble in a mixed media piece, like a non-waterproof fine liner, in something you're going to go over with more of a liquid. Whether it's a gouache paint, a watercolor, or something else, you don't want your fine liners to move once they're set down, unless you intentionally want them to move once they're set down. Things should be done intentionally, not accidentally. Here I'm going to add in stars. Without recording it, I'd made a mask out of printer paper and taped it down carefully with washi tape. By adding a bit of water into some white gouache, I used this stiff brush and stipple across to stars. I added more water than you may want to, but my stars were supposed to be more pale. If you want the stars to be more vibrant, you add less water to the white gouache. And now all I have to do is finish it off. That's satisfying, cutting the painting out to get those edges a little more cleaned up. I went back over the edge to make sure the line was perfect because I couldn't see the initial line and I didn't want to make a horrible mistake. And now it's in a lovely frame. Here's my Nebula Dragon. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video and will see you with another one very soon.